Thanks for coming here today. I'm Anthony. I'm the training program officer here at D2R. And for those online, if you didn't catch that, this will be recorded and saved for everybody in the room. And of course, only shared with people who are interested in today's workshop, where we're thrilled to have Christian Cawthorne here, who's a partner and patent agent at Norton Rose Fulbright Canada. And actually, I noticed before you were at Norton Rose, you actually spent a few years working at the Shriners Hospital for Children, and specifically the genetic unit.
Yeah.
So obviously, some clear overlaps beyond being a Norton Rose Fulbright and Christian being a key partner of both D2R and the Technology Transfer Office here at McGill. So we're thrilled to have you today to provide this introductory workshop where hopefully you'll learn more about the importance of IP and also how it can be a strategic asset for you as you pursue commercialization of your research. So with that, I'd like to sincerely thank Christian for being here today, and I hope you all enjoy the session. Thanks.
Thank you. So the title, how important is it for startup intellectual property? I think that I kept the most important slides or the hook for the end. But in the meantime, the idea will be to try to introduce you to IP to make sure that you understand how it works and how you can really leverage all the IP eventually in a startup company. There are steps that are initially good at a startup company, others that are not. We'll see over the presentation what to do, when to do. But there's no strict rule that apply that, okay, you always have to do that, always have to do that. It's only a question of, okay, what are my resources now? What are the needs? What is coming up? So we'll see. In essence, there are 7 forms of IP. On that graph, on that chart, you only see 6 forms of IP. The last one is integrated secret topography. Has not been used since about 2004, I believe, or 2002. The last one was Nortel. So not very useful to discuss about the last one, so that's why I didn't include it. But those 6 forms of IP, if you compound them, if you use them, if you know how to use them, they can create a lot of value. And the more you compound them and the more you add layers to, the more you generate, you can generate added value. I'll leave patent for the end because we're going to be focusing on patents afterwards. I believe I might be biased, but patent for me is one of the first form of IP that any startup company will have. And that's the one that will generate eventually all the leverage for the first round of financing, for example. Trademark. Trademark, it's a form of IP, has its own code and law. It's good technically. There's no deadline. There's no end to it. As long as you keep on using the trademark, it's going to be enforced. You have to renew it every 5 years, if I recall correctly. Sorry, disclaimer, I'm not a trademark agent. But at the end of the day, the key idea is as long as you use it, you can get protection under the Trademark Act. What it does, trademark, it will protect any logo, for example, work, any, for example, a poster could be on your computer, sometimes on the top of the computer, the Apple for Macintosh, or for Apple, I should say. Sorry, Macintosh is, I'm too old. All of this to say, at this time, at 10 a.m. this morning, you might have seen at least more than 300 trademarks without even noticing it. Sometimes you simply open the fridge, you see the name on the fridge, a trademark. Anything in the fridge, the label there, sometimes some could be the bottles, it even could be trademark if there are some recognizing feature about the bottles. So trademark could be extremely powerful. The other one is trade secret. Trade secret, basically, it's a poor child of IP. It has no code and law. The only recourse you can have is under a civil law. You can sue someone for stealing a trade secret. But the trade secret could be extremely powerful. The best example is when I started an IP a long time ago, 30 years ago. First mandate I was given is to go up north in a pulp and paper pulp and paper plant. Basically, they had the mandate for Fuji and Kodak So those were back then the only two companies in the world printing pictures, basically. They had the worldwide contract for producing the photographic paper. And when I arrived there, they told me one of our employees left with the secret recipe. It's been over 35 years. We had the exclusivity, and now within 6 months, we lost 25% of the market, worldwide market. So you see that if you keep the secret properly and it remains a secret, there's no expiry date, there's no nothing, and it could be extremely powerful. The difficulty with trade secret, though, is if you come to a bank, for example, or any VC for leveraging to raise some money, it's going to be difficult because you need to take some steps to preserve the trade secret and making sure that all the contracts binding, for example, the lawyers reviewing everything, the undertaker and everything, that no one will spill the beans and that the secret will remain secret. But it could be extremely useful, but more difficult to raise money out of it. Copyright is good, again, for 50 years plus the life of the author. So again, could be very useful. Copyright, though, will protect, for example, any literature, art, music, poems. A rule of a game, for example, is protected by copyright. So that has a lesser value. But the beauty with copyright is, and we're recorded, I shouldn't say that, but I'll say it still. You don't need to come to see us, for example, for registering copyrights. You're going to be paying, I shouldn't say too much, but you're going to be paying still too much when you can do it with perhaps an hour of your time online with the Canadian Intellectual Property Office, paying $50 on your credit card, and that's it, that's that. So copyright could be a useful tool and not so expensive. So it's fun sometimes to have it on the side as well. Plant breeders' rights, as the name says, it's for protecting plants that have a stable trait. So either, for example, the ones that we had were strawberries that came to maturity earlier in the season, or that were redder than normal strawberries, that were sweeter than normal strawberries. So as long as that characteristic is stable and reproducible, you can protect it under the Plant Breeders' Right Act. So it is codified in law as well. But keep in mind that if, for example, you make a strawberry that is sweeter and you made it genetically by modifying the genome of the strawberry, for example, you could protect it by patent as well. So that's why I always keep in mind that compounding those various forms of IP could be useful. Although I must say the plant breeders' rights are more time consuming because you need to grow the plant here in Canada. It need to be they will be examined by the plant breeders examiners, basically, that will go on the field, that will verify everything. I think there are 2 exams like these in the field. So it's a little bit more troublesome for the client, for us, for everyone, but still it is useful for protecting a plant that has a distinctive trait. The difficult to read here. I don't have the right glasses. The industrial design, industrial design will protect only the visual aspect of something, the ornamental aspect. Think, for example, of the sole of a running shoe or the tread of tires. Why there are no tires, 2 tires having the same tread? When you find the tread that is great at evacuating water, for example, preventing slippery conditions and things like that, simply because there are industrial designs that have been filed on those tires. So no one could reproduce the exact same visual aspect, not the utility, not the useful aspect, only the visual aspect. So the industrial design basically is good for 10 years, renewable after 5, one time after 5, and then last for 10 year total. But that could be extremely useful. We have patent agents in the firm, basically, that only do industrial designs, especially for hockey gears. weird enough, but the goalie's pad, basically, the glove or all the various equipments, they are being protected, both sometimes when they have a utility of protection by patent and industrial design. And who should you consult for these various forms of IP? Three of them, patent agents, being industrial design, patents, and plant breeders' right. It's a patent agent that will be able to do that. Obviously, the plant breeders' right is going to be a patent agent in the field of plants or life science or biotechnology, for example, that will understand the biology of the plant. But industrial design, it's going to be a patent agent in the mechanical field most of the time. Don't ask me. I wrote once an industrial design application 30 years ago. And my mentor at that time told me that was the last one you will ever write. And I'm glad. It's a different beast. You don't write as you write a patent application. So it's different. You need to be specialized for that. But patent agents that are in the mechanical field, they are used for that. The trademark, you're going to say trademark agent, obviously. One thing to know about trademark, and in fact, any form of IP, you could file them yourself. You could prepare them yourself. But I would guard against that. For copyright, that's all right. It's easy. And the only thing you have to log online is a description of your copyright. You don't have to upload, for example, the song or anything like that. But for patents, it's highly legal work. So trying to do it yourself could be very difficult. And 99.9% of the time, if you file it yourself, within 1 year, you're going to receive a letter from CIPO, the Canadian Intellectual Property Office, saying that you have those defects to correct. Then they come to see us and they say, I received this, I don't know what to do. Obviously, because it takes time to train a patent agent, but at the end of the day, those mistakes sometimes cannot be corrected correctly. They can be somehow eased up, but they cannot be cured totally. So the error has already been done. For trademarks, for example, a few years back, Canada was a signing party of a treaty that allowed everyone to file a trademark in Canada without the use of a trademark agent in Canada. So, for example, someone in France could file a trademark application in Canada directly. Again, sure enough, they receive a first examination report, and they were contacting us and say, "What do I do now?" So sometimes it could be cured, sometimes not. The idea sometimes it might be worth to seek the right person right from the start. Although there are costs associated with that, but it can prevent much more costs later on. For a trade secret, I would suggest to, if you don't know how to do, basically, if you've never managed a trade secret, seek the advice of an IP lawyer. Why? The IP lawyer basically will advise you on the proper contract to put in place with your employee, with your board, with everyone in the firm, even the founders. You'd be surprised how many times I've seen co-founders of a firm fighting and then one leave with the secret and start another company and start competing with the first one. So you want to have the proper contract in place. And for that, it's not a patent agent. I've been reviewing contracts, but I don't pretend that I could write a good contract. So an IP lawyer would be the one. And copyright, if you don't want to do it yourself, an IP lawyer as well can do it for you. As I said, that normally it's not that long, so it's kind of easy to file. So if we focus on patents, we need to discuss as to what is an invention only, because a patent will be granted for an invention only. And then for this, we need to understand what the patent is exactly, what it does provide, what it does cover, what its limitation. And here you have, I believe, the exact definition from the law as to what is a patent online, at least the first two lines, not the criteria themselves. But the most important part there is you get an exclusive rights in return to a full disclosure, and bold and underline full disclosure. don't even try to withhold some information, thinking that I'm giving them all the pieces of the puzzle, but not the glue. They won't be able to reproduce it. If you think like that, you get an invalid patent eventually. So it's a full disclosure. And again, in return to the full disclosure, government eventually will grant you 20 years of exclusivity, starting though from the date of filing. So you have to understand that sometimes there's a delay between the date of filing and the date the patent is granted. You only get the monopoly when the patent is granted. So sometimes that's why you hear in the news, pharma cases, they get 8-year term patents or 12-year term patents. It's because there's been time between the filing and the grant that reduced the 20-year, the effective exclusivity from 20 to 8 or 12 years. The other thing to understand is to obtain a patent, we need to satisfy at least those 3 first criteria, meaning novelty. Novelty is easy. It's whether it's black, it is black or white. The question is, are we novel? Is my invention has ever been described in one publication in a single source anywhere? Could be a written publication, could be an oral publication, anywhere. Has it ever been described? So this, anyone here in the room can decide whether or not it is novel or not. Has it been described? The question is, if, for example, 90% of my invention has been described, but 10% is not contained in the publication, that 10% brings novelty. So I do have novelty. It is really strict. It's black or white. Best example I always give is, does my left hand and my right, is my left hand novel if I know that I have a right hand? The answer is yes. Simple, because they're not identical. They're an image of each of them, but they're not superimposable. They're not identical. So it's as strict as that. Is there a difference? Yes, we're going to play on that difference, and we have novelty. Utility, second easiest criteria, because I don't know anyone working on something that has no utility. So very seldom will I question the utility. Utility could be seen as well sometimes as if you're trying to define something and you forget that if you don't include, for example, a specific parts or piece, it won't work. Everything will fall apart. An example of a patent that fell on utility was basically the roller for the solar blanket for pools, basically. It was a telescopic tube, but there used to be a pin in the middle of the linking the 2 tubes together or locking the 2 tubes together. The pin was not claimed. So basically the 2 tubes could disassembled and it was not working. So utility, basically, if a patent failed for utility, the fault is mostly on the agent, I should say. So because normally I understand that you will always be working on something that has utility. Inventiveness, non-obviousness, by the opposite, obviousness. Your application, your invention need to be inventive. This is where it gets difficult. Why? Because there's no right, there's no wrong. We've argued, 2 agents, an experienced agent argued on the same invention over the same art, basically, that existed. And basically, it all depends how you argue whether you're going to be inventive or not. An example, I was able to obtain a vaccine for cow, and basically the only results that I had were for mice that could not be infected. So it's only because I kind of defended it correctly. Another example, and that was for Miguel Spinov, salt water. I was able to obtain a patent on salt water in the US. Not any salt water. 8 to 20% salt in water. I didn't claim it as salt water. I argued that it was an herbicide. Yeah, but it's known in the Bible that you can sterilize the grounds, the field by spreading the salt. So no, we're not sterilizing, we're selective. We're only killing the right weeds. And I was able to obtain. So it's only a question of how we do approach things on inventive steps, on inventiveness. But inventiveness, basically, the way it is decided is, I told you if you have a piece of disclosure that discloses 90% of your invention, if that 10% missing can be found in another publication, for example, the examiner will mosaic those two publications, or sometimes two, three, four, and will say, it's kind of obvious to combine all of them together to arrive at your invention. But then you have to say, no, it's not so obvious because nothing in that first one suggests to go seek in the other one, or vice versa. There's always arguments, but again, those are sometimes heavy legal arguments. And this is something that it is best left to the agents, basically, at the end of the day. But those are the first three and most important criteria to satisfy. There are more than that in the Patent Act, obviously. So now that we know what a patent will do, it will protect an invention. We need to know what is an invention, because not everything is, according to law, an invention. This is, again, the legal definition. Could be extremely vague because it says any new and useful art. What is art? In my mind, when I started, I was thinking of paintings, and no, art is anything basically that is not covered by machine manufacture or composition of matter. But the most important part here, I underline new and useful to make the link with the patentability criteria that we saw previously, and composition of matter. Why? Because too often people will think, it's basically Robaxacet is kind of obvious. Painkillers exist, muscle relaxant exists, I simply put them together, it's kind of obvious. No, not necessarily. If I can prove that these act better when they're being taken together in one pills, or their synergy, so composition of matter will be important. Another example, you have the intermittent wiper, for example. You invented that. I can claim a car having those wiper. So it's a composition of matter. It's composed of many, many things, but amongst other things, my invention. So anything that has my invention on is de facto inventive. So composition of matter is extremely useful. It's in 1896, the director of the United States Patent and Trademark Office, the largest patent office in the world, said that anything that had to be invented has already been invented. Obviously, he didn't like his job or didn't believe that he had the job, but still, since then, we're over 13 million patents now that have been granted, so in the US only. Another important fact is to understand who will be an inventor. And too often, there are disputes, for example. Yeah, but I'm named on the scientific article. Why am I not an inventor? There's a huge distinction between inventor, author, and technician, for example. If the results could have been produced by a computer, by a machine, or in a routine manner without, I shut down my brain and I simply produce the experiment, I'm not an inventor. The same in the author, for example, when I was at the Shriners, I got my name on a few scientific articles, but I was generating the results, at least for two of them. One of them, no. But I was generating the results. And the way it was way back then, the first author is the first author was the PI. Second author was the one generating the results and those that help. And the last one was the director of the genetic unit. Will you tell me that the director of the genetic unit had anything to do with that research? He was able to perhaps secure the funds for it, but didn't do anything, didn't participate in the research. So there's a huge distinction. And it's not because your name is listed as an author that you necessarily are going to be an inventor. The inventor, the law says, anyone participated in an inventive manner to the invention. Again, they like the word inventive, but it's very fuzzy. The question is, does the work that that person did amount to an invention? Or is it only routine work? An example of that, I had a case from another university where the technician was only trying to generate a vaccine again for bovine. And instead of taking water and solubilizing the antigen in the water, solubilized it in one of his buffer. Previously, the antibody, sorry, the antibody previously was only stable for 4 hours. With that mistake that he did, it was stable for more than 9 months and efficient for more than 9 months. So basically, you start from 4 hours stability with no commercial use possible because it's not long enough, to 9 months where there was a commercial use. So there was an invention there. So who was the invention? The inventor on this one is the one who noticed what made the shift. And eventually it was the technician who realized that he took the wrong bottle. And said, I took that bottle is my buffer. Okay, from now on, we only use this. But he became an inventor just because of that. Whoops. I was pressing on it without seeing it. Okay, the inventor. When should we be applying for a patent application? Again, too often people are coming to see us and sometimes it's already too late. I would say before any disclosure, before any publication. I would go even further by suggesting before any signing of non-disclosure agreement or any contract. Reason being, for example, I had a case again from McGill where one of the researcher sent a manuscript for publication. The manuscript was to be reviewed by peer reviewers. One of the peer reviewers simply stole the manuscript, he received it to review it, but what he did, he took the manuscript, put a cover page on it, filed it in the USPTO as his own application, as his own invention. So basically, yes, he stole the invention from the researcher from McGill. What are the recourses? McGill or the researcher could have tried to sue that person. But again, do you want to incur costs before court and have to prove everything? McGill is not in that type of business. So basically, McGill lost everything and the researcher as well. The thing is, we only noticed that publication was stolen after we had ourselves filed our application, and the examiner in the course of examination told us, yeah, but we have the exact same invention there that was filed 2 months before yours. So because of that, you want to make sure that your invention will not be published, will not be seen by anyone who should not be seeing it before it gets filed. So whenever possible, say whenever, because it's not always possible, but whenever possible, before any publication, even sending your manuscript for publication, for example, or any signature of non-disclosure agreement, because a non-disclosure agreement is only good as the value of the person signing it. You disclose to me your invention, for example, and I arrive home and I simply talk to my wife and today I was told the best invention in the world and I disclose everything. That's a disclosure. And it's weird how the world could be extremely small because you're always going to find someone that will be working in that field. A few years back, I was sitting on the plane and I was reading scientific articles basically. And the one beside me at one point was overlooking. It was in the exact same field of scientific research. So obviously I was not working on an invention because if I would have, it could have been a disclosure without me knowing it. So you always have to be careful for that.
Also, thesis and PhD defense.
Same, thesis and PhD defense, you can ask that they be made behind closed doors, that the thesis could be put on hold. But again, be put on hold, I've lived it. And sometimes, although you say, you tell the researcher, you say, okay, we need to have all those results within the next 10 months because it's on hold only for a year. Sure enough, 10 months later, we don't have all the results that we have. We need 13, 14, 15 months. So it's always best to try to, but if you're at that level, for example, for thesis, the idea generally it should come to your PI, your director of thesis, and eventually should return back to, for example, McGill at the OTT, or formerly OTT. I never had the right idea. Eh?
TTO.
TTO, Tech Transfer Officer. And for them to evaluate whether there is an invention worth of filing or not. So that prevent those cases. But the idea is always keep in mind that there's someone to help you somewhere. And at McGill, they're very well organized. Basically, I understand it's free for the researcher to come and see the TTO. So, and when should we file a patent application? Here I marked as soon as you have preliminary data, because sometimes some researchers are so what's the word I'm looking for? Perfectionist. That they say, no, I need those data. They're not based. For patent purpose, n equal 2 is good enough for me, or even n equal 1, as long as there's predictability that it's going to be reproducible, good enough. And sometimes you can't prove everything. For example, I had a client that came to me once in the early days of omega-3, omega-6, basically benefits. So in late mid-90s about, and that time she had, that person had 32 different benefits of omega, and said we could prevent this, we could treat this, we could, it's okay. When will you be able to provide me with data for these 32 different benefits? No problem. In a year? No problem. A year after, we only had 6 benefits proven. So if we file with 32, we're stuck because it's going to get published later on. So the idea is always, we always have to be careful. But as soon as we have preliminary data, at least sit down with the agent, look, or first the TTO and then the agent to say, okay, what can be feasible realistically speaking? And I never say 12 months. I always say 10 or 9 or 8. Why? Because there's Christmas vacation, there's summer vacation, there's sickness, there are always delays. If it can be delayed, it will be delayed. That's what I learned. So in terms of strategy, as I said at the beginning, there's no one shoe fit all. There's no good or bad strategies. It really depends on your need. But in the life science field, for example, and that's what I basically kind of understood it is here. In the life science field, you want basically the delay for regulatory approval, the delay for all the research are so long that you want to delay the grant and delay all the expenses as long as possible. So one possible strategy, although the patentability search would be optional, it is always a good idea. But good thing with McGill, the TTO does it for you or for us. So that's one good thing. And it always, why it's a good thing? Because it gives a good chime to start with as to whether or not we have something valuable in hand. But the real thing starts when we start filing a first application. First application, ideally, in the life science field, suggest to file it as a US provisional application. US might not have such a good press these days, but the US provisional application allows for one thing. You don't have 20 years of patent term. You have 21 year. No one will say 21 year, but in essence, that's what it is. Because you file a provisional application, for example, today, let's say March 18, 2026, under the provisional rules, you need to refile in every other country where you want to be protected in a year from now. So on March 18, 2027, but the 20-year term will start only on March 18, 2027. So it doesn't count that first year for the 20-year, but will count for stopping any publication that could be citable against you. So it's really useful, the provisional application for that. The idea though with the provisional application, keep in mind, you're paying for filing an application that the only purpose is for setting a first date. But 1 year later, it will be abandoned if we don't take any action. If you file in the US, it will be abandoned and will never get published. but in the US. Too many agents have done the error in Canada filing what they call a provisional type application in Canada, because in Canada you could file an incomplete application. You file that incomplete application, and a year after they decide, oh, we'll let it go abandoned. Yeah, but it will still, although it's abandoned 12 months after, it will be published 18 months after, 6 months after the abandonment. So in Canada, you have to be careful. But the US works great. The cost between Canada and the US is about the same anyway. So might as well. And the biggest market is really in the US. So if there's a problem, sand in the machine, you can always rely on the US market with your US provisional that you can convert. So US provisional is a good idea. And generally, as I said, you want to defer all the costs over time. The best strategy for that would be to file a PCT, what we call a PCT application or an international application. PCT stands for Patent Cooperation Treaty. The danger with that, and if there's one thing to remember, there are no international patents. There are scammers all over the globe basically trying to sell you international patents. It's going to cost you $45,000, but you get protection worldwide. That is today. In the mid-90s, it was $2,000 worldwide. They thought that it was not realistic, so they increased their price. But still, and CIPO is warning against those scammers as well. So international patents does not exist. That PCT application, what it does though, it will reserve your dates and will reserve basically 158 countries. Your rights in 158 countries. So you file in one place in one language. You eventually get a search report, you get an examiner looking at it, telling you whether it is novel, inventive, useful. So you get a good idea as to whether prosecution is going to be easy later on or not. And then at 30 months, 2.5 years from the first filing, so the provisional filing, you get to file in all of the other countries where you want to be protected. Because one thing I didn't mention at the beginning is that a patent is territorial. So if you want protection in the US, you file in the US. You want protection in Canada, you file in Canada. Every country, there are a few regions in the world that got together for securing, for example, a European patent. You get 39 countries, I believe. Weird enough, in the European patent, you get Morocco, you get a few countries that are not even on the European continent, but still, they signed the treaty, so you can obtain them with the European patent. There's the Eurasian patent as well that exists. There's the ARIPO, which is the African Regional Intellectual Property Office that grant patents for selected countries. And there's the GCC, the Gulf Country Convention, meaning in the Gulf area, there are a few countries that sign a convention that would allow to file one application and be enforceable in all those Gulf countries. So again, the PCT will allow you to obtain one search, one opinion in one language to defer all the costs for 2.5 years, but you eventually need still to file in all of the countries. So you're simply buying time and a little bit of security with the opinion that will come with it. This brings us to infringement, because once you obtain your patent, or when you are working on commercializing something, you're researching for something, you intend to commercialize something, sell something, there's always a risk of infringement. Infringement basically is the misappropriation of a form of IP, meaning that, for example, you intend to commercialize a new vaccine or new bacteria or whatever it is, and that vaccine or that bacteria or components of it have been protected by patents. If you don't seek the approval of the patent owner, you might be in trouble. You might be liable for infringement. Infringement, that is, again, the use, purchase, making, and importation of any patented invention without the approval of the owner of the patent. So the infringement basically you have to see it from the point of view that you want to commercialize something. And you, no, sorry, the reverse, the point of view that somebody else is commercializing something that infringe on your application. That's the best way of seeing it, basically. Why it is the best way? Because the other way around, the other direction, meaning from me commercializing something versus somebody else's IP, we call that generally freedom of operation or freedom to operate. So a freedom to operate basically could be extremely useful because it's going to be useful for investors. Investors, when you come to investors for first round of financing, for example, or further rounds, they will ask you two questions. Do you have exclusivity on your product? Are you going to be the only one, or will they be copier in the field? So meaning, what is your IP that you have? Do you have any patent application patents protecting your invention? First, and second, they will ask, can you commercialize now your invention? Now that you have a monopoly on it, can you commercialize it? And that's where the FTO will come. That's one of the two times where FTO will come into play. As before, just before getting into getting at a table for financing round, for example, you want to have at least some information about the freedom to operate. I say some, why? Because, for example, I drafted the patent application and filed it on your behalf. You're in negotiation for a round of financing, and the one on the other side of the table is asking you, do you have a freedom to operate option? I could produce one, but don't you think that I'm biased? I wrote the patent application. I could be biased. I have an ethical code by which I need to adhere. So basically, I need to set the bias on the side and do the job correctly. But still on its front, somebody else could come and say, that opinion is bogus because he's biased. He's involved in the IP. So sadly, generally, I don't recommend using my services if I drafted the application. I say sadly because I would happily do it. It's highly lucrative, but it's not a good service because someone could eventually argue that it might not be the best opinion because I'm biased. So generally, I would simply suggest perhaps look into another agent for that technology. I can refer to other agents if you want, if you don't know. But again, that would be one thing. Being at least aware of the FTO and having searched for freedom to operate basically will prevent eventually, and that is almost a certainty, very costly litigation costs. And believe me, I'm currently into one now, and should have been a simple one because I'm appealing a decision from the Commissioner of Patents. So it's not the opponent is SIPO. So basically, I thought that they wouldn't defend themselves too strongly. But we started basically the lawsuit about 2.5 months ago. We're already 100 grand down the drain. So you can see that it can get very costly very rapidly. And having searched for a freedom to operate will prevent those because you will see where the pitfalls are and if you can avoid them or what to do to avoid them. Another example of that, in the late 90s, there was a company called Medicago. They were producing recombinant protein from alfalfa. They came to us and they say, okay, can you look at our process and make sure that we have a freedom to operate on that process of production? They don't have, all they had was a patented process because the output, the recombinant protein, they were doing it as a CRO, basically. They were simply producing for third parties. So, and when we look at their process, they were infringing a minimum of 5 patents, basically, in their whole process, bits and pieces here and there. If you seek for license for those 5 patents and you're dealing with major players, basically their revenue or their gain would have been close to 0, or if not even negative. So they say, okay, we need to change our process. So don't wait when it's too long. Start looking at FTO very early in the process When I say very early, as a startup, you're not commercializing tomorrow. You're still in the research and development in the early phase. But when it gets a little bit further, it's time to at least start looking into these. And for that, you don't necessarily need to have the opinion of an agent, the formal opinion and everything, but at least have traces and documentation to show that you have been looking for that, you've been searching, you've been made aware of what exists and why what exists is not relevant. And for that, very seldom when the clients come and ask me, can you do this? Yes, but I can also show you how I do the search so you can repeat the search from time to time. So you're going to say, why would I do that? Because I could charge for it. If the client is doing it, I don't. I prefer to develop a relation with clients instead of looking at the quick buck and that's it, that's all. So at the end of the day, it's much more profitable. The client learns about that. And it's not rocket science. Anyone can do any search on databases as long as you know which database to search and how to search it. So what to search for. The other thing is the FTO, when you do it early enough, it will allow you to establish a strategic marketing plan because you'll see whether or not, unlike mid-scale, you can commercialize something or not. And if you can, great. If you cannot, then you can early enough change your plans without having lost too much money in research and development. It will also secure your IP position, will help with further rounds of financing. And again, that is, I think it's really, 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 really important. Why? Because as a startup, any startup, it's really money at the beginning. You're always fighting for money. Whether it is now, you just close a round of financing. Woohoo! Let's open the champagne tonight. Yeah, but tomorrow we need to start another round of financing because it's going to be closed in another year from now, perhaps. So you're always going to be looking for money. So at the end of the day, it is kind of a good hygiene, IP hygiene, let's call it this way, to have a search for freedom to operate on from time to time and making sure that there's nothing there's nothing that will prevent us. So the various steps that we normally do for an FTO, and then it's there that you can appreciate how complicated it could be and why it could be so costly, but as well as to how you can work with the agent to eventually understand these and be able to do part of it. First, the first thing that we need to sit down, for example, with you to understand exactly what you're going to be doing, not what you may be doing, what you will be doing, because, or what you are doing, because we cannot, if we search on something that you're not doing and you change, for example, one process to another, what we're going to be searching is going to be off the grid. It's not going to be good. But once we know that, we establish the search, we conduct the search, and we get a number of documents, patent applications, patents, and as I said at the beginning, only patents will grant you a firm monopoly, firm exclusion rights. So as an FTO, you want to know which document will prevent you from commercializing something. You would think I should be looking at patents only. I would say yes, if you are intending on commercializing tomorrow, for example. But if you're doing that FTO search on a regular basis early in your process, you're doing it more like a landscape analysis to see what exists, basically where are the pitfalls to avoid. And when you know that, you can very easily after that design around. But once we have that, once we have all the patent application and patents, generally what I do, I return to the client, because if I get 50 patent and patent application to analyze, and it's a claim by claim review, it could be extremely costly because it's going to be extremely time consuming. It's fun for us, not fun for the client. So at the end of the day, generally, I return to the client and say, okay, do you want me to analyze all those 50 documents or X documents we've done? If yes, the estimated time could be about that much and that much. Obviously, it's a rough estimation because we don't know yet. And But if you want, we can restrict to some of the documents. If you want to clear out some documents and say those I don't want analyzed, we can reduce the list. You can reduce the list, and we will analyze those documents that you will tell me to analyze. And then it's a claim, as I said, it's a claim by claim basis. So that means that if a patent application has 20 claims, nowadays, newer applications that are filed in the last 2 or 3 years tend to have claims around 15 to 30 claims. Why? Because US charge for excess claim fee, Canada charge for excess claim fee, Europe charge for excess claim fee, Japan too. So generally, we try to maintain the number of claims within that range. So that means that 30 claims means that 30 times I'm asking the same question. If I'm doing this, and this, meaning your process or what you have, am I infringing claim 1? So claim 1 is doing this, and this. Yes. Okay, claim 2, start the same question, and 30 times like this. So it could be extremely long. And that's why sometimes that is a type of soft analysis that could be reviewed and documented though. That's okay. Although it's not being made by an agent, it's not a formal opinion, it's something that could be made internally and say, okay, we've reviewed it. This one is not relevant because of this, or was confirmed not to be relevant because of this. I have clients sometimes that tell me, and sometimes they are very succinct. They say, am I infringing their patents if I don't do that? So give me some background around that. I need some meat around the bone, but when I get to learn a little bit more, and sometimes within a few minutes, I can get, yeah, no, obviously their application is requiring this. If you don't have that, obviously you don't infringe that claim. So no problem. Okay, settled. And for them, it's documented and it gets in their file. And whenever the next time they're going to meet with VCs or anybody else, they will be able to prove that, okay, we've done our own work, we've searched, and basically everything is clear. Most likely, a VC will want to appoint their own agent to verify that still, but that's at their own expense. So it's not at yours. So that's one thing good. So that's the whole process of conducting a freedom to operate opinion. I think it was supposed to finish at 11. Oh, was it? Yeah. 11:30. Okay, I got time. Sorry. The danger though of simply dismissing having an FTO done are tremendous, and understanding that it can be done internally. Sometimes even by a stagiaire, for example, and we sit down, for example, within an hour or two, it's sufficient to train someone to search on a specific database with specific keywords. So it's not the end of the world. And from that on, that research can be done, can be repeated from time to time. But ignoring it could result in lawsuit, financing delayed, worse, loss. Eventually, if you're looking for defending your documentation for your document for defending prosecution, for example, in prosecution. I'm going to be receiving an office action. The examiner is saying that, yeah, but this is obvious because of this. I report to the client, and when the client come back and say, yeah, we've seen this document, we searched for it, we've seen this document, the argument is already prepared in their mind as to what exists, what is relevant, what is not relevant, what can be done. So, as I said, it's only good hygiene to always integrate that type of search. Perhaps not in the first 6 months of the inception of a new startup company, for example, but at least within 2 years, it's good to start, because or depending on what type of product you're working on and how long will be the possible commercialization, possible round of financing, you want to be prepared for that. You want to already have some indication. So the takeaways, the takeaway on this, the FTO not only will prevent possible expensive lawsuits, but will also provide you with perhaps new ideas on how to complement your IP, to strengthen it, how to add to your IP. So just another example of this, long time ago, in the 90s, Paul Galland invented the puzzle 3D. But Paul Galland was basically a record salesman. He was working for RCA, and when RCA decided to shut down the record division, he said, "What am I doing? I'm closing on 50, no job, no nothing." So he searched basically for patents, and at the end of the day, he found that the patent that covered the cutting of the puzzle 3D, not the cutting, but how to assemble a 3D puzzle. And basically by searching what it need to be done, what exists, am I infringing anybody else, and so on, he found out improvements on how to be able to do it. And I remember he gave a speech a long time ago, but he was giving a speech saying that originally he was able to only cut about maximum 10 puzzle a day. And by the end of basically all his research, he was able to cut a few hundreds a day. So it's just a question of improving basically your technology, because those search could be extremely useful. Again, continuous monitoring is really the key word on this. And this is the hook, or the bait on the hook, is all of this. I told you there's a real value to it, and there's a real value for any startup company. This is a case scenario from Innovia Pharma. Those are all public information, so basically I don't have any private information on this one, but I knew though the researcher, having studied at the University of Montreal. Philippe Rennes was a researcher way back then, and basically the research I was doing at the Shriners Hospital was working exactly in that same field as Innovia, basically. So, but here the facts, they started working on the project in 97, 98, about it. Then they decided that there are two researchers basically from University of Montreal, one chemist, one biochemist. Typos here, they're not 2 and 2, but 1 and 1. And they say, okay, we think that we have something, we can advance something. Obviously, they advanced their research faster than we did at the Shriner, but at the end of the day, they were able to start up the biomet, basically, that was originally named. They secured a few rounds of financing through T2R Capital and so on, and they filed their first application in 2000. So you can see that from 97 to 2000, it took them still 3 years, or about 3 years, to be able to gather all the information and data and to have something strong. But during that time, there was no publication, no nothing. And then after 2000, in 2001, Biomet changed their name to Innovia. And subsequently, then you see how it went really fast down the hill. In 2001, 2002, 2004, 2005, 2007, and 2010, they filed applications. The thing to appreciate is that if you file, for example, in 2000 provisional application, in 2001, and here the dates that I'm giving are different inventions that were filed. Why I'm saying inventions? Because in 2000, the one that was filed in 2000 as a provisional application was filed in 2001 as a PCT, and was filed in 2002 or about in all the various countries. But those 2001, 2002 further filing of the provisional are not counted there. So it came from one application in 2000 to a huge world in 2010, because they had about 7 different families of invention filed. Each one filed in a number of countries, and in early 2000, trends were to be filing in at least 7 countries, if not 12 countries. So you can imagine that one start with one invention goes to 7 or 12. And times 7, that could be extremely costly at the end of the day. But for them, was it really worthwhile? Yes, 2 reasons. They were they had an orphan drug disease, orphan disease drugs. So basically that allowed them to obtain a further 7-year or a concurrent 7-year of exclusivity in the US. And there were no competitors or anything. So that placed them in a very favorable place on the market for attracting any investors or any potential buyers. Over the timeline of 15 years of research results, they found a treatment to significantly improve bone density of patient between 6 and 24 years. And when I was at the Shriners, I was seeing basically newborn babies born with 20-something bone fracture. It was crazy. But the bones were so soft. So that is a tremendous benefit, basically. And I gave here the name of what was the product. In total, 165 million were invested by different rounds, over 7 rounds of financing. And at the end of the day, in 2012, so 15 years later, they got bought for $1.4 billion, over 165 million investment. So there's real money to be made there. The question is, okay, how did it start? It all started with IP. There would have been nothing without IP to start with. But the other thing that is not reflected there is that how much did Philippe and his partner got into that deal? I don't know. The question is, how much did they get valued every time, every round of financing? What were the conditions they were ready to accept, and so on? But again, if you don't accept them, you don't get the money. If you don't get the money, you don't get to the next one. You don't get to the 1.4 eventually. So it's give and take. You do your best. You never know, but all you know is that you can get to 1.4 billion in their case. Some of them, I had a spin-off from McGill Replica, started with Jean-Marc Juteau, who was a TTO at McGill in the 90s, saw the technology, found it very interesting, started Replica, and that company basically attracted at one point in time potential buyers that could have been a major deal, but they kind of declined in their case, they said, no, thank you. We're going to do it ourselves. We're going to do the clinical phase ourselves. Hopefully they will get something. But all of this to say, at the basis of everything, IP is there. And the rest, whether it makes a lot of money, makes money, or no money, it's a question of decisions that are being taken along the way. But without IP, there won't be any case to discuss. So, as I said, IP was central to the benefit of Innovia Pharma. It allowed to attract investor. Without IP, there wouldn't have been anything about that. So, and at the end of the day, it was really worth it. So that was it. I'm well in advance, 25 minutes, sorry, but I can answer any question. Normally, I should have mentioned if there was any question, but to stop me and ask. But if there's any question, I'll be more than happy to answer any question. And even online, you get the okay. So thank you. Yeah.
So I have a question about the FTO. So is the reason that if someone has a patent and it cannot commercialize, is it because the patent would infringe, doing what the patent allows you to do would infringe someone else's patent?
Here you're mixing 2 things together. Obtaining a patent is one thing, and commercializing your invention, because you don't commercialize a patent, you commercialize your invention.
Mm-hmm.
Your invention is protected by patent, but that is one thing. Commercialization is a separate thing. So it's not because you have a patent that you can commercialize your invention. It's not a guarantee. You could not, depend. And if you cannot, it's basically most likely because there are other patent applications either preventing you, patents or patent application preventing you to enter that market, or there could be regulatory approval that are difficult to obtain. In the life science field, if you're thinking of vaccine, in the COVID, they kind of speeded up all the process for approval and making sure that, but again, Canada was slower than the US to approve the vaccines. So some of the vaccines, so. But again, sometimes could be regulatory approval delaying things or even preventing you. Think of Shire. Shire had a product for Alzheimer's. Basically, before Shire, what was the name of the company? Anyway, they had a product for they rebranded it as ViviMind, but basically it was for treating Alzheimer's or reducing the beta amyloid plaque that would reduce the onset of Alzheimer's. The thing is, they went to the FDA in the US for getting their approval. The FDA looked at their process and they said, no, you need to change this, that is not correct, that is not good, that is not good. And at the end of the day, decisions that are being made, good or bad or right or wrong, that I'm not judging, but at the end of the day, the FDA refused, and the Shire did not comply with the FDA. So that pharma aspect of that product was dead.
Okay.
They had to rebrand the whole product as natural product called ViviMind. Supposedly that helped the memory, the cognitive aspect. So
I see. So it's quick follow-up. So does that mean to conduct a freedom to operate search, you also need to look into the regulations in the countries where you wanted to commercialize as well?
that would be a different analysis because regulations, again, I would not be the one trying being able to even discuss the regulations in Canada. We have a department, for example, at Norton Rose that only deal with regulatory approval. So all the listing, what need to be done, when it need to be done. So they are specialized in that. And as soon as a client, I'm working with the multinational JSK, nothing confidential here. My name is on database with them, but with JSK, their vaccine, every time they come back and ask me a question of, okay, we need to do this, when do we need to do this, or can we obtain a CSP, which is a certificate of supplemental protection? So I'll refer you to my colleague who's going to be able to answer your question, and then she take over the file.
I see.
Because obviously a patent agent, we're totally out of our basket if we try to answer those questions.
Thanks.
Okay.
There is a question online. Somebody would like to know if you're hiring.
Currently, no. I would say ask the question perhaps in 2 years from now. I know it's long for waiting for a job, but no, currently, no. There will eventually be a need in the life science field because I'm not getting younger and I'm going to be forced by the contract that I have as a partner with the firm to retire upon a certain point. So we need to hire before I retire. We need to hire before I retire so we can train that person to replace me basically. So not now, that would be too early, but most likely in about 2 years from now.
And there's another question. Hi there, thank you so much for giving the presentation. As graduate student in field of oncology working on cancer detection, I usually write down and note down ideas that could help streamline and sometimes even come with a different approach. I usually would run some of the experiments and set hypotheses on my own free time. I thought that probably publishing such results could potentially help it get validated along with customer discovery. Is it a good idea to publish the results first and then work on the IP, as IP can be very expensive?
True that IP could be expensive, especially if you're on your own. The thing is, if you publish everything first, basically you won't be able to obtain a good protection that could be attractive for perhaps larger companies later on to buy. Because one thing I didn't mention, because I hate to mention it, is that in Canada, US, Mexico, Australia, you can get a 1 year grace period for any disclosure. So assuming, for example, that you publish something today, or no, that you have published something 9 months ago, you could still file a patent application in those countries within 1 year of the date of publication. Japan has 6 months only. But Mexico, Japan, you need to advise them in advance at the time of filing that there was, so there are some criteria. But generally, if you don't get Europe, if you don't get China, if you don't get Japan, yeah, if you don't get it, you're losing major markets as well. So the question is, will the investors be willing to give you money only for limited markets? Not sure. Just want to come back, if that answers the question.
There's a follow-up. They
Okay.
say, do you mean by provisional patent?
A provisional application basically is a first application filed in the United States. The real called provisional exists in the US and in the UK. So, but a provisional application is an application that is generally lighter in terms of work. So it's not as expensive as a complete application. We don't spend 30 hours working on the perfect set of claims. We generally define what we want in broad statement, but more and more, the requirement around the world is that the level of completeness of a provisional almost amount to a full application. So generally, I try to do as complete as possible, although we call it provisional. But the provisional is really the means by which it is being filed. So it's not being filed in the US. They say it's section 35 USC 119 A to D for regular application and 119 E for US provisional. So depending on which section of the act we file, it starts as regular application or provisional. I just want to come back on the hiring thing. As a piece of information, if anyone is interested in IP, as I was saying at the beginning, the idea is keep your ears open. Anywhere to get experience is always good, whether with us, whether with competitors of us. You'd be surprised how many people I've sent to competitors that were hired, but we try to get them back later, but it does not always work. But no, the idea is get the training and the knowledge anywhere. It's valuable. Once you have it, as I was saying at the beginning before recording and anything, offline, I was starting at a first IP firm, Robic, not to name it, for a year. And after a year, headhunter came and called me and said, "Hey, we want you." And I say, "Who's we?" And basically that was the one partner from Swaybe, now Norton Rose, who sent me there and called the headhunter and said, "I sent Chris there last year, go get him back." A year after, I was attracted. So anywhere you can start anywhere you can. And it's always good. The idea is to make sure that you can be trained by a patent agent. There are a good number of firms in Montreal. So that's one thing.
I have a question about that whole FTO business. Would you not already do that to some extent before you even file your patent, right? To be sure that the invention that you claim is not conflicting with a lot that's out there.
At the beginning, it might be perhaps premature. Yes, you could, indeed. But will you get the full benefit as if you would have done that FTO like a year later? I don't think you need those benefits even before filing the first application, because you're at the time of filing the first application and even before, you're really in the R&D stage of the company. You're really in the research and development. You're trying to set the basis of everything. It's very difficult to put up a building if you don't set the basement before. You need to set the base. You need to set the basis, the funding, the foundation first. And once that is finished, before looking into, will I make it a dome or a square building or whatever else, then it might be useful to look on databases for an FTO.
Okay.
Yes,
You kind of mentioned stuff about publications, how much to disclose, and it was always about kind of academic publications, conferences. What about investors, VC? Because you gave the example, somebody just filed it, put their name on it, and they stole it. But you know, you have your idea, and then you're then kind of going talking to investors, VC. How much then do you recommend disclosing, not disclosing while you're going through the whole kind of patent process, etc.?
if I come to an investor, for example, and I say, I got the best idea possible, it's in that black box, but that black box is sealed and no one can know what's in there, it's not a disclosure. If they believe that there's something in there and they're ready to give me some money for it, great. But most of the time they will ask to see what's in the box. So if you need to show them what's in the box, at the TTOs, for example, at McGill, they're very good at sometimes masking or modifying an abstract, for example, for removing key aspects, just to make sure that they don't disclose the invention. As I said at the beginning, I can provide you with all the pieces of the puzzle, but if I don't give you the glue, or if I don't give you the image to show how to do it, you won't be able to do it. And that is, if you can't do it, it's not a publication. The idea, the danger though, is most of the time the examiner will still say, yeah, but that's obvious. It could have done it. When we deal with obviousness, it's my saying against his saying. So I need to be creative. It's more difficult to convince an examiner to back up on that type of argument. If I need to tell the examiner that, no, that publication is not enabling, does not enable anyone's skill to reproduce the invention, I need to say why. I need to give a little bit of meat around the bone for him to understand that, okay, true, indeed, it won't work. But it's a difficult argument. It's not impossible because I use it almost once a month, but it's a difficult one. Meaning that those are arguments I would prefer not having to do.
One follow-up then, how do you then kind of reconcile stuff now in the RNA space? Because I guess back in the day was you have your protein, you had your small molecules, you kind of, there's a lot of space to work with a patent. RNA, it's now almost, it's not that many chemistries. They're making these new chemistries, there's delivery, and then there's the sequence. So if you're going after the sequence, how does that work in terms of a patent? Because someone could say, oh, well, someone has all these sequences filed, and your sequence is kind of similar to that sequence because, you know, 4 letters in the genomic code. You could come up with all kinds of combinations.
The first, in patent law, they don't make much distinction between RNA and DNA.
Yeah.
So because basically your RNA at the end of the day is generated by.
More around just the genetic sequence,
But on genetic side, for example, in the mid-90s, everyone was chasing about the sequencing the genome and protecting those sequences. They don't know what they were useful for. When they say, it's a database good for fishing for libraries of whatever it is. And that didn't work. Nowadays, if a sequence has been disclosed, but is not known for its use, the fact that I use that sequence for a treatment will be protectable in itself. So in the definition of an invention is, again, within art, that includes the word use of the invention, use of a known product. The use of a known product, a new use of a known product is allowed in Canada, in most countries, in fact. As long as I can say no one ever used that product for treating that disease, even the sequence was known, because obviously, a lot of sequences have been sequenced, but if you don't know what it is good for, and now they also, more and more, you don't necessarily only use one sequence. You always package it with something else to enhance the efficacy or to enhance the transcription or whatever it is. So basically, the combination of all of these, even if they're individually known, the combination will be predictable also. So I wouldn't dismiss it right from the start just because sequence was on databases. I would look even further, okay, what case can we make about the use of it, the utility? I had one, I was arguing yesterday, which was kind of not yet published. I won't get into the details, but let's say the thread between the examiner says that, oh, your invention is, for example, A, B, and C, and A, B are disclosed in document one, C is disclosed in document two. It's obvious to combine the two together. So nothing inventive there. So yeah, but nothing inventive because you now know that that specific product in A could be used to treat C. But before that knowledge, no one would have thought of combining them together because so sometimes you can make that type of argument, but ideally you want to stay as far as possible. Obviousness is always more complicated to argue.
There are two follow-ups on the box thing. One person is saying, so what if we just show the box, but not disclose how the box is made? And the other person is saying, we can show the box and show its application, but not tell how the box was made.
Sure.
In fact, when I was referring to the box, I was referring to what was in the box, basically, but if looking at the box, you can't tell how it works. If you cannot understand why it works that way, why it is efficient, it's not a disclosure. So and there are various decisions on these that says that if you cannot understand why it works this way or how it works, it's not a disclosure. But again, let's try to avoid those situations because they're difficult to argue. So, and then the fact that how the box is made, the fact that you've shown the box and the box is, for example, something that could be retro-engineered in some sort, either by analyzing the component of the box or the content of the box, not the content, but the elements that makes the box itself. It could be argued that it is a disclosure, and again, it could be tricky to get out of that one. Yes.
So you mentioned thanks. So you mentioned the NDA has its limitation. So I wonder when it comes to talking with investor, how useful it is to sign NDA with investors.
The NDA with investors or anybody else has on its front a security of a character of confidentiality. So basically anything you're going to be discussing covered by the NDA, assuming that the NDA is valid as well, will be confidential. But again, nothing preclude anyone from disclosing. Even if I sign an NDA, I could disclose it and you could sue me. If I disclose it, if I sign an NDA,
Yeah.
and still, despite that, I talked about that invention.
I have to sue you.
Yeah. But again, will you sue me? First. Second, what damages will you be able to get back from me? I don't own much. My wife owns everything. So that means that basically it is one type of protection. It's one degree of one layer of protection. But if you can try to file before that, just in case.
So it's not a mandatory thing for the investors to not do anything. It's just they sign an agreement, but nothing will stop them from still speaking.
They let's say they don't want to be sued because that means that the name of the company will be on the court roll.
Bad reputation.
Exactly, and believe me, in our field, reputation is everything. I know people that were sued for what's the when you buy stocks, insider trading.
Yeah, no.
I know that person, and I know that person got stuck once, twice, and now the reputation that person is done. So you don't want to have that sticker in your back.
I see.
The other thing is, if the company is a public company, again, they have a shareholder to report to, so that's the last thing they want to report to, a misfit or a misappropriation of something, so. Let's say, I'm talking about someone who has a very, very little ethics, basically. But there will always be, if they can make money out of it, some will dismiss their ethics for $2. But generally, you have to make sure that the people you're dealing with are of good reputation. Just totally aside. A few years back, I was looking into having my roof redone. Okay, I started with a few quotation, and then when I started inquiring about the three people that came, two of the three people were using a material that company that was supplying the material was in court for refusing to honor the warranty and everything.
Okay.
So if you inquire about the people with whom you intend to deal with, and you do your due diligence on those people, making sure they're a good reputation, you will avoid those problems.
I see.
But you also will find with VCs, they don't want to have to sign an NDA with every person they speak to for the first time. So oftentimes it's only when you're going into depth over your science that they actually want
See the data.
then to have a CDA. So that initial conversation, oftentimes they want it to be non-confidential anyway. So
True.
you still want to be able to give them enough, but not enough before you're.
And the same for multinational, for example, if you want to come to Merck, for example, or to Novartis or JSK with an invention that could complement their technology, they will say, we're gonna listen to you if you want, but we're not signing any NDA. If they say that, you're lucky. It's because they're interested. Because sometimes they will simply turn you off.
No, they won't even reply.
That's it. So, but they will systematically refuse to sign an NDA because they might be working on that, or they might want to allege one day that they were working on that field before your disclosure, just in case. But I say the NDA need to be valid. And again, that you can complement if I'm wrong, because that's not my field, but you need to secure first a date of expiry. I don't think you can go 5 is really the most, but could be challenged. 3 is best. It need to define the field of the disclosure, because you can't reduce to silence completely someone. So you need to say, we're going to be discussing that technology today. Anything that's going to be discussed at that meeting need to stay confidential. And there's a third criteria, but I never remember what that third criteria is. That's why it's important to see an IP lawyer and not a patent agent for contracts.
Thank you.
No problem. Yes?
I guess we're running out of time, but there are two questions that I have. The first is question on discovery versus invention. For example, can you patent a natural product? Like if I discover some new type of RNA that is not discovered anywhere, but I found it through some experimentation, can I patent that natural product? The second question is patenting algorithms.
Okay.
There's like, it's kind of like murky. Some people say you can, some people say like there's some asterisks.
It depends how you present it. For example, algorithm, I was able to secure a method for discriminating between bipolarity, schizophrenia, and major depression, all based on an algorithm. So, but at the end of the day, the method was having a real concrete result, making discrimination between the three of them with a success rate of above 92%, whereas in practice, it's less than 50 nowadays. So algorithm, yes, not every country. In the US, we had extreme difficulty. It had to be a method of treatment and not a method of detection. But it can be patented. We obtain patents in Europe, in Canada, in the US as well. As for the first question on natural product, it's country by country. For example, in Brazil, you won't be able to. In the US, if you're trying to protect, for example, a protein, you sequence a protein, you find that that sequence has never been published anywhere, but that protein is natural, you won't be able to. A gene in the US, technically, you're not able to obtain a patent on gene. But the mRNA, the cDNA, the cDNA, you're going to be able to obtain because it's not the gene complete. It has been shortened. So it really depends. But in Canada, no restriction at all. It's new. It's not been published anywhere else. It's not because it exists in nature that that someone has found it first, and that it has a good value. It has a good benefit. So Canada will recognize, as Europe as well. US are the most restrictive for genes, for example, in natural products, and Brazil as well. Brazil, because they want to protect all the molecules that could come out of their forest, for example, that could be harvested from their forest, and they say, no. We're banning all natural products. So.
Thank you.
Okay.